what we're doing today in this paper is more applied philosophy. I'm not going to be doing some kind of a lecture on epistemology, but more applied philosophy, which I think there's a place for that, clearly in the church. So, and what I'm doing, over the last several years, I've been doing research in the matter of progress. And as a concept, not as a sociological phenomenon, but just as a concept. And doing research and working with research assistants, it's quite interesting that until up around about the mid-1980s, there are a number of articles being written on this subject. And then after that, you really cannot find much of anything, which seems to indicate to me, and maybe this is an improper inference that I'm drawing, but that we've already accepted the idea of progress as without difficulty for the Christian community, and I would raise a serious objection to that. There is a book, it's called The Idea of Progress in the 19th Century, and that is written by an Irishman, I believe, and I forgot the title. So there's been some work done. I've just been reading again C.S. Lewis's book, That Hideous Strength. I may have read That Hideous Strength. Well, Lewis is already on top of that back in the middle part of the 20th century. And I think Tolkien was as well. But that's not my point this morning. My particular concern focuses on how the commitments of the Enlightenment thinking gave particular direction to the idea of progress. So let me say first, I'm not against progress. That's not it at all. I've been a benefactor of it. But when it became wedded to naturalism or the ideas of the Enlightenment, May tells us in his book on the Enlightenment that the two foundational notions of the Enlightenment were this, sort of put in a simple form, that reason is the best path to knowledge, or maybe the only path, and that new is always better. Those are sort of the assessment and the assumptions of the Enlightenment. And I think he's right on that, Henry May, and his book called The Enlightenment. And then there is the accompanying standards that have come with that, and that is, how do we know when progress has been made? And that is by the two standards of efficiency and convenience. And it's that, I think, that's been somewhat problematic. So what I want to do is I'm going to say a few more things about and then open up for discussion, pushback. But I'm just telling you two things. Number one, I'm not against progress. And number two, I'm not suggesting we all go live in an Amish community somewhere. We don't all have to go and live in a cave and eat sardines and crackers and wait for Jesus to come and start a fire by rubbing two sticks together. So I'm not a Luddite by any stretch of the imagination. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And some might even say, well, there's even a baby in the bathwater, but I think there is. And so I'm not on either extreme. I'm really raising these questions for the church to give serious consideration to, and I'll show you where I think compromise, or at least we've assumed certain things, a lot of it from social media that we've allowed into the church, that is, at the end of the day, I think will prove to be, if not subversive, at least corrosive to the very best intentions of who we are as a community of faith. Now, the thesis of the paper is that evangelicals have, in the name of relevance, uncritically accepted the alluring promise of progress, believing that new is always better. And they get this, I would argue, from culture and not from the Bible. This often means the uncritical implementation. And I'm focusing here on social media, but it wouldn't be only there, just some way to get a leverage on the discussion. To expand the work of ministry without considering it as a metaphor for entertainment. Social media is a metaphor for entertainment. So when you use a medium that has a metaphor of entertainment and you try to use it as a vehicle for a message that's not entertainment, is there a collision there? Is there a contradiction that develops? Is that what makes it subversive? Anybody of you read any of Neil Postman's work? All right, Amusing Ourselves to Death, but maybe more. How many read Technopoly? Technopoly is one that he wrote a little bit later, which is a follow-up to Amusing Ourselves to Death. Then there are several other authors. How many have read, this, by the way, it's not a quiz to see what your reading list is. I just want to know, if I mention a name, do we have name recognition? Has anybody here read Hunter's book on To Change Your World? Okay, so out with Hunter. Okay, won't mention him. So what I'm going to then say is I think this has contributed to a developing ethos in the church. So I'm focusing on this concept of ethos. What sort of an ethos are we developing in our churches by using social media only as I said, a lever to get at the discussion? But it's an ethos that in the church that mimics the spirit of the age. Now, if I'm talking about an ethos, just so we all know what I'm talking about, the ethos of consumerism is often promoted in the church. If you want to have a good example of what modernity looks like, is the mall. The mall is a perfect example of efficiency and convenience. All right? And it's an ethos that is created in the mall. Everything from the carpeting on the floor, to the music that is played, to the paint that's on the wall, to the advertising that goes up in the store. Everything is designed to create an ethos of consumerism. Americans can't live without that. And so you can go to the mall and actually, without intending to buy a lot, you really often come home with more than you intended. And why did you do? What happened to you when you were in the mall? Did a demon overtake your body? Or what happened? Well, there's an ethos. And I would say that there's an ethos that's developing in the church, and I've spelled that out somewhat in the paper, which was a lecture I gave about a year ago. I also maintain that this ethos tends to neutralize, or is at least corrosive, to the historicity of the Christian message. If new is always better, and I'm not saying that new is never better. That's not my point. But if that's the ethos of the church, how does the historicity of the Christian message fit into that ethos, say? So we are constantly trying to sort of make it real that Jesus really did live on this earth, that he really was raised. Why do we have to have this intense necessity of trying to drive home the reality of something? Well, it's because the ethos that has been generated in the church, but much larger so in our culture. Now, one more book. Has anybody read Mediated? Okay. There's a whole development of literature on what's called mediated reality. Now, you can see mediated reality is when reality is reduced to flat screen images. Okay? And that becomes the real world in many cases. And it's the real world that offers us all kinds of options because it can be manipulated. See? So when people are constantly living like that, and then they come to church, you see, how do we integrate the reality of Christ's death, burial, resurrection with a culture that has been living with a mediated reality, okay? So, again, I spell some of that out I argue that this is subverting the best of intentions, and I want to make that so clear. I believe that evangelicals, I think their intentions are absolutely stellar. I think they want to reach the nations for Christ. They want to reach as many people for the Lord as possible. Totally aware of that. I just think we've not asked some very important questions, which I'm going to mention. The general purpose, or the general response is that we hear is the message does not change the methods. I hear that all the time. Well, we're keeping the same message, but the methods are changing. Folks, if we're talking that way, we don't understand. Neil Postman alerted us to this a long time ago, as did McLuhan before him. And that is, there is a message in the method, or there is a message in the medium. Okay. For example, I talk about the metaphor of entertainment. We have now in the States people putting what they think are evangelistic messages on billboards, right? Things like, why don't you meet at my house before the game, signed God. If you don't stop using my name in vain, I'm going to increase gridlock every Friday night, signed God. And the intentions are good, no doubt. But you see, the billboard is the metaphor of advertising a product. So when you start putting an evangelical message there, how do we make that fit? Say, I'm going to say, no, that's subversive to the message you want to convey. Even though the intentions are good, I keep saying that. So I'm going to argue there is a method, there is a message in the method, and there are two standards of progress, efficiency and convenience, and the end is that pragmatic commitment has been baptized with the water of evangelicalism. An evaluation of what to do and when something is successful is on quantitative messages, measurements, not qualitative. So those are sort of the key concepts. We have moved from qualitative concerns to quantitative. Well, in naturalism, and all you have are particulars, you can quantify particulars. We still talk about character. For example, today I hear evangelicals talk about values. I don't hear them talking about virtues. What's happened? Do you think that's just a small thing? No. Someone says, well, we have family values. And I think, and that says what? It says zero. Because until I know what your definition of a family is, I don't know what you mean by values. Virtues are something totally different. But still we hear Christians not talking about virtues, they're talking about values. These are just some of these areas where I see this becoming obvious. So we can quantify everything, right? How many people in the world are dying without Jesus today? So we've got a number. We can calculate that. We got computers who can do that for us. And now I understand that there are websites that are calculating how many people receive Jesus on a particular website. That is, all you have to do is click, I believe in Jesus, and now that gets registered in, I was going to say in heaven, but maybe not quite in heaven, but it does get somewhere in some database. You now look at it, 25 people read this message, 2 clicked that they like it, 3 clicked they received Jesus, and then, I don't know what the others, they just didn't bother to click at all. So there are 4 points that I'd like for us to think about, and that is when we're thinking about how do we use social media, that's a narrower view than just talking about technology as a whole, but social media, we should ask, one of the questions I think we should ask is, what is gained and what is lost? That's an important question. What is gained and what is lost? So, and notice that when the church talks about that, they're going to talk about it quantitatively. They're not going to talk about it qualitatively. Why? Well, how do you qualify such things as character when we've achieved that? Consider this, not only what technology does for us, but what technology does to us. We've all been affected by technology, see. But we don't ask that question. We're only thinking, what does it do for us? And then a third that I've already mentioned, that there is a message in the medium, and then this shifting from the idea of something that has quality to the idea of quantification. How many numbers, how many people did you have in church today, how many people did you baptize, how many people did you reach yesterday, how many surveys did you put out. And I'm not saying that those things are necessarily in and of themselves wrong. I'm only saying when we reduce Christian ministry to that only, we've, I think, reflected the very shift of our whole culture. So I'm not going to say I'll probably say something more, but I now want you, to those of you who have read the article, raise questions, push back, and it's not just because I'm an old man and I don't want anybody to have fun anymore. I don't want you to have an iPhone. But, just to think about while you're thinking about your questions, just to think about how all this has affected us. My granddaughter came to me one day and she said, "Babu," she calls me Babu. She probably thought I was a baboon. She couldn't get that out, so she just called me Babu. She said, "Babu, I don't understand something." And I said, "What's wrong, honey?" She said, "Well," she was about 5 years old when she was talking to me about it. She said, "I was in Sunday school today, and one of the little boys in my Sunday school class asked for prayer." And I said, "Well, so what was the prayer?" She said, "Well, he was praying that somebody would find his PlayStation because somebody stole it." She said, "Babu, I don't understand that. How can you steal a PlayStation?" And so I'm thinking, how do you steal a PlayStation? So, dear, what is a PlayStation? Well, she said it's the place where there's a sandbox, and there are swings, and there's a slide. And you see, for her, because her parents control how much technology is in her life and wants her to use her imagination, she thought that a PlayStation had to be the place at the park. Now, that's how it has been affecting. Affects our language, affects how we view things. So, pushback, questions, comments. The question is, well, what about when we have printing press? That was a new form of media. And we've used that. So why should we not just use other forms of media that make it possible for us to get the information, in this case, maybe the gospel out? Well, the problem with that is that we have two different kinds of medium. And that's where the difference rises. And T.C. Moore has dealt with this in his book, and the title of his book is Culture Matters. In fact, there was a great problem when the printing press came. And the question was, how do you control information? And that was done by creating books and publishing houses. There was a day when you pretty much knew, I'm speaking now in the evangelical world, you pretty much knew the theological orientation of a book from the publishing house from which it came. That's not probably true quite as much today as it was at one time. So that was how to control the information, because everybody realized that with this, that would be a great problem. When you come to the electronic media, there is no control. And that's where you can't comparing apples with oranges. Yes, they are information delivery systems in a sense, but they're totally different. There is no way for us to control the information that is now coming out through technology, social media. Think of what happens when something goes viral. Okay? Now, just for some instances of where this is creating some problems. Some of you remember you've probably all heard about the bombings in the marathon. So the police opened up and set up a web page where everybody could give clues. They'd seen something, okay? So they would just type it in. And, well, boy, this must be really great. But it proved out to be very damaging. Why? Well, because people were making accusations that were unfounded. They were implicating people who were not involved. And what appeared to be, at the very beginning, something that really would be helpful to the police turned out to be very dangerous for the police. And because I don't know how many strikes they were getting every 5 minutes, but it was phenomenal. In fact, there were some instances which I won't go into. We've got the problem of cyberbullying now. That's creating a real problem because we don't have any control. So I think when people bring that up, I just point out, well, yes, we understand, but there was a way of controlling that. There's no way of controlling what we have now. So we get these, people. How often have Christians forwarded things that are not true? They get an email from somebody and says, Procter & Gamble is, they're playing with the devil. They've got the devil insignia on their product and all that. And Christians just keep putting that out. And before we know it, things have happened. There are people who have been hurt. We can think of how quick it is to destroy a business right now using social media. It's quite phenomenal. So it's the control issue that makes a difference. How has technology, particularly social media, how has that impacted language, primarily language, seriously affected? I was thinking, as you were saying that, a response to that. Neil Postman, in his book Technopoly, deals some with that issue, but it has, and now I'm just speaking not in light of what I've read with Technopoly, but language is taking a real hit today. There's a whole jargon that's being developed. I don't know that we as evangelicals understand the importance of language and the preservation of language. Because after all, it is how we communicate the truth of God. So there is certainly with technology and texting. So now we don't have to worry about grammar, and I can realize that. Syntax doesn't matter. I know that when I grade graduate papers, and I can realize, yes, that's right. You've lost all capacity to know what good syntax is, because it doesn't really matter. It's this very reductionistic view of communication. Bottom line, just so long as they get the message out, we don't care how the message is formed. But read a C.S. Lewis and just get the wonder of language and the use of words. But the whole idea of how the quantifying has affected the whole discussion of ethics, and where virtue ethics, though there are some who are doing work in virtue ethics. There are folks who are doing some good work in there, but in general conversation, and I would say, unfortunately, even in the church, even the evangelical church, is often reduced to that. You listen to what we're hearing today as arguments, and where the foundation is. The foundation is it's more or less, it's almost always quantitative. And that makes it very difficult for us to carry on, I would say, an engaged conversation for the kind of morality, the kind of ethics that would flow out of a Judeo-Christian worldview, where the question is not how many, but what kind. Now, surely we're all interested, in a sense, if you're talking about evangelism and we want more good people and we want bad people, but it's not that. We're measuring what is good by these quantitative terms. And I find that to be, I think, subversive to what is going on in terms of what should be going on within the evangelical world. And I'm just speaking of the evangelical world now because this is my audience. And it's the audience that I'm terribly concerned for, coming from the States. I think that's, as I give one of the examples in the paper, this idea of efficiency and convenience. These are monsters almost. We have certain churches today allow you to do your giving by bank draft. Okay? So at the beginning of the year, you simply tell the church that you are going to give your $1,000 a month. Now that's positive thinking. But you're going to give, whatever it is, let's just say we're going to be charitable today. You're going to give your $1,000 a month. Now, we give you a check, and we give you the routing number from our check. Now, you will just draft that from my account every month and tell you to stop doing it. Now, is that efficient? Oh, absolutely. Particularly for the church. Is it convenient? Oh, certainly it is. But what has it done to the concept of the human being in his giving before his God? I would say it has seriously eroded that. There is no thought anymore to my giving this week. I made that decision January 1. But is there something about the matter of my taking physical and placing it in a plate or whatever, whether it is a check or not, it is, I suggest that there is something that is at least undercut, corrosive to the whole concept of sacrifice. So that's another example. Convenient, yes, but is it, and it's certainly efficient. The church is always going to know, right, I got that $1,000 every month. There are many things like that we could talk about, even clothing, how that has been affected, how missions have been affected, how doing church, whatever that is, has been affected. Yeah. It was interesting last night or sometime I was reading in that hideous strength, and I forget who it is. One of the characters makes the comment, well, we need to get back to Merlin, who's the 5th century. We've got to find a new way to get back there. So, yeah, we are where we are. So the question has to do with, well, how then do we actually handle this technology? Are we going to get like the Catholic Church? Are we in the early days, and we're going to forbid these books, we're going to forbid this technology? And I don't think that's the right way. Personally, I don't think that's the right way to go. But it is to start informing parents on the dangers of using this kind of technology so early on. There are studies right now that are being done at Stanford. I think Harvard has a study on multitasking. And, for example, you've got young people who are texting, they're doing their homework, they're listening to MP3, whatever. So they're doing 3 or 4 things, and technology allows them to do those sort of things almost simultaneously. What we're finding now is, and the studies have been done, it's really interesting to watch the videos of these studies, but what we're finding out is multitasking at that level, at that age, not just at that age, but at any age, is very destructive to the neural pathing. Very destructive. What happens is that people lose the ability to be able to isolate important from secondary issues. And yet here we are, as evangelicals, that is one of the key things we ought to be doing, right? Because there are all these options in front of us. How then do we make the distinctions between this is essential and this is not essential? So this is not even the church raising this issue. It's the academy is raising this issue because of what it is doing to the minds of the human being. Well, how can we determine what of technology is useful and what is not? Well, I think, first of all, we would need to ask some of these questions that I put. What is gained? What is lost? Is this quantitative over qualitative? I think, is there something embedded in the method that is contrary to the message? So those are the sort of things that I would want to ask up front. But the beginning point, I think, for all of us is to realize that there is a message in the medium. Okay? How do we go about that? I'm not sure that there's a hard and fast way to say, oh, this is good, this is not good, this is useful. And we might find that certain technology is useful for one thing, but it's not good for something else. Just like music. There is certain music that's good for one thing, but it's not good for something else. Marching music is probably not the kind of music you play when you want to put the baby to sleep. Right? It's because it's not designed for that. But we want to then be careful that as Christians, that we're not simply seeing ourselves as delivering information. That's all the church is about. We just need to get the facts of the gospel out. And I raised some real questions about that. What does that say about humanity? What does this say about this person to person, this humanity to humanity engaging one another, which is not done. I know that I can run quite afoul here at this point with some my colleagues and probably many here. And I don't necessarily mean in this room, but if you are in that company, just play good poker and don't think I've disturbed you. I'm not so sure that blogging is a method for getting it for the gospel. I just don't think it fits. I don't see how it fits. Oh, well, yeah. Let me say, maybe I should be a little more careful. Certain kinds of blogs work quite well. All right. How many of you are familiar with Transpositions out of St. Andrews? It's a blog. Yeah, it's a blog, and that's really great. As a matter of fact, they're really doing something. I just got a notice from there. They're going to do imaginative apologetics. So I'm kind of interested to see what they're going to be doing with that. So there are blogs that do quite well, but this tweeting, texting, I'm just not sure, because for me it's a metaphor for something else. It's not a metaphor for giving serious historical information. The other thing is it tends to separate the person side from all of this. And so I have some concerns, and those are the kind of questions I think we need to be asking. If you want to put on a billboard the time of your church and where your church, or you have some kind of a meeting, well, I think that's quite all right, because just advertising, it's just data. When you're trying to give a message of great serious import that there is a God who is really there, and that he sent his son to be the savior of the world, a message for which men and women have died for, I just think the billboard is the wrong place for that. Why? Because it is the metaphor of consumerism, and Christianity is not a product. Are there some people who might see certain technology as a different metaphor? Yeah. And I'm saying no. That was a quick response. You may perceive it differently, but it's still a metaphor of entertainment. It's not a metaphor for delivering. The judge, when he gives a verdict, does not tweet it. All right. When companies put together a contract, what do? Well, we put it on paper, we get it sealed, we get it notarized. So it was started as social media. So that's what it is. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't certain ways that it could be used and have some benefit. I think we have to ask ourselves the hard questions. Is this the appropriate place for the message I want to deliver, so that I can see method and message, or medium and message, fitting together? I often hear my students will say, oh, no, that really doesn't matter. And I say to them, okay, let me ask you something. Say that I'm going to, I'm a zealous evangelical Christian. I've just moved into my new neighborhood, and I want everybody to know that I love Jesus, and they need to be born again. So I had a new bathroom put in my house. I had this old commode that's just sitting in the garage. So I take it and I put it on my front lawn, and I put the lid up on the commode, and I write, Jesus saves, John 3:16. Should I do that? And to every person, they'll say, no, you can't do that. I said, why? Well, that's just not an appropriate thing to do for the message of the gospel, and put it on a commode lid. Well, precisely. My point is made. There are certain vehicles that seem to me not to be conducive. They seem to be conflicting. But I'm not making a general statement. I'm not saying nothing. What if everybody in my development was doing the same thing? Would that, because that's how they get their information, that's how they put up their religious. I would still say no, because I'm a Christian. And because I value the message of the gospel as a historic message that should be delivered in a certain context, I would still say that would not be an appropriate way of communicating. Now, I know that runs against the grain, but I'm wondering if Christianity is a worldview, And everything we do flows out of a worldview. I don't judge something is right or wrong because everybody is doing it, or that it is the accepted method. I have to judge it in light of what do I think, how does this fit into a Judeo-Christian worldview of reality? What is reality? What is the reality of the gospel message? Yeah, I answer it really quickly, but that would be my response. Now, I'm sure we can get pushback on that. Yeah, yeah, I know we would. And let me be very kind here and say this as kindly as I can. I think you think that way because you're a product of that age. And now people come back and say to me, yeah, but listen, Bruce, you were a product of your culture. And I said, yes, but there's a great difference. The culture I was influenced by had strong Judeo-Christian influence. The culture you're influenced by does not. Your culture is basically influenced by naturalism. And so what is accepted in the way we see technology, the way we use technology, comes out of a naturalistic worldview that says that all there are particulars, there are no universals, and so particulars are all that's out there. I think as Christians, we would come back to that. But see, what I'm happy for is just the discussion to get started. Seriously, you've asked me in a personal way, and I just shut. Bang, shoot that one down. But I'm open to discussion. My concern is the church isn't even having the discussion. We just simply assume it's convenient, it's efficient, it's out there, methods don't really matter, medium doesn't matter, let's just do it. So I would just, I'd love to be in conversation, and I am now to some degree with people as we are in discussion with this, just to get it on the table and say, have we thought about this? Not only what does technology do for us, what is it doing to us, what does it do to how we understand the message, how we understand reality, and what is gained and what is lost. So even though I come back and those are my opinions, and I would be happy to, maybe put forth an argument for it, I'm just happy for the kind of questions you're asking because I think those are the kind of questions that still need to be addressed in a fuller sense than what I'm going to do here. The idea is, how then does the new, how is this affecting us? And that may even be affecting us more because efficiency and convenience are the standards. Whatever delivers greater efficiency, whatever delivers greater convenience, always determined by quantitative counting, right? So that is one of the things it does for us is it makes us anxious. We are an anxious culture. What do we want? We want something new. How many people will go down to camp out 2 days at a shopping outlet where there's going to be the new iPad, even though the new iPad may have bugs in it, I don't mean literally, but it may not work as well as the one they have, but they want it because it's what? It's new. And I see this anxiety within the church. We've got to have a new vision. Everything's got to be new. A new title for a book. It's always pushing this new. And I'm not, again, the new. But I don't think it's a good standard for us. So we are buying into this same kind of a consumerism, the new thing, the new product. So people come to church, and what do they want to hear? They want to hear something new. And so the preacher wants to keep his position and his paycheck, so he delivers what? Something that's new. And so he says, we're going to have a new vision for the church. We have a new slogan for the church. And I've got a new title for a message. And it's all to play into this concept of the new. And I understand there's only really one thing that the evangelical ought to be anxious about, in a sense, for the future, and that's Christ's return. So technology cannot communicate the desire. And so the church is about doing that. That's why we come together, the community of faith coming together. I was talking to my academic dean just before I left, and pedagogically, I'm against distance learning. That is, on the internet. And so he says, I said, one of your core competencies that you claim that we have here as a seminary is spiritual formation. Explain me, how do you do spiritual formation? And how important is spiritual formation to the whole Christian truth? Our coming together as a community, living in community, which I think Smith is a big advocate of. We talk about community, but that's having coffee and donuts after the service. It's not true community. I've even gotten to know some churches who are now actually doing counseling by texting. Well, I think that's a good question about, what do we do we got people out here who are already committed to that. The unbelievers are already sort of committed to this way of communicating. I think kind of comes to your question as well. But then I'm going to come back and say, all right, we have to do two different things. And we're always pretty much involved in that. One, we have to do remediative. One, we have to do preventive. So remedial type of things we do is how do we reach across the line and help this person, not buying into everything, but knowing how to kind of hook that person, but showing them the humanity in our doing this, which can't be done by texting. And then the other thing is the preventative, and I would say that's where our churches need to come in and start asking the questions and helping the Christian community to see the importance of this discussion, so that when I walk into church, it's not the Bible that I see up front, it's a flat screen that I see up front, flashing a whole lot of advertising that I don't really care about. And, they put a bulletin in my hands, get the same information. I find it distractive and not in the right kind of a place. It almost seems to me, that sort of thing, it almost seems to me like having a funeral at a carnival. It just seems like it's the wrong place to do it. The church is not thinking or preaching or living in the light of the eschaton. And so we have divided. Here's where you see the influence of culture, where we've divided actually the particulars from the essence, from the universal. And we're living, while we're professing theists, we're living as practical naturalists, because it's so convenient to us. And I realize it's a tremendous struggle, particularly living in America, where it is available to us. It's available on every corner. And the church has just bought into that. And that's what creates an ethos in the church, the new, the efficient, the convenient. And I'm saying, but wait a minute, the ethos of the kingdom is not that. The ethos of the kingdom is one of commitment and sacrifice and community and humanity. It seems to me that while we say, you're made in the image of God, so much of what we do really has no concern for humanity. And maybe I've been reading too much of Schaeffer of late, but I think that this is something that desperately needs to be regained, not just the words that we use. What does that mean if we are sharing with the unbeliever his humanity, the one thing we have in common? When I debate atheists on university campuses, one of the things I will make clear, the one thing that the two of us have in common is we're both human beings. We share something. Paul says in Mars Hill, we're all of one blood. But the way we're treating people is if they are products, and that we have a commodity to sell them, and they are consumers. And it just seems to me that it's quite contrary to the message that we have. So as long as we're doing these things in the church and building that ethos of the spirit of the age, but we're still preaching the historic message of Christ, we still want commitment, we still want sacrifice, and we stand back and say, where is it? Why aren't we getting it? We're preaching the truth. And I'm saying, yes, you are, but you're undercutting it by the very things you're doing, because you're creating an ethos that runs afoul of the very things that you so desperately want. I find in Christ, let me back up. We talk about heaven and all of that. It doesn't affect much of what we do because we don't see heaven as a reality. But particulars only exist because of the universal. Remove the universal and particulars fall apart. We have something wonderful to offer the 21st century. God, I was going to say 20th century. That tells you. I lived most of my life, you see, in the 20th century. We have something wonderful. It is that Jesus saves. But if we don't understand the implications of that in the way we use technology, the way we think, bringing the universals and the particulars together, we then just become one voice among the many with no more authority.